Hello. We all are aware that effective public policy making is necessary for good governance, and in this context, Parliament, parliamentarians, political leaders, administrators, Prime Minister's office, and other organizations are contributing their best. But in addition to that, there are other determinants also which are effectively contributing. These are political parties, interest groups, international agencies, and social movements. Today we will discuss the role of political parties in influencing and in policy making. We have Dr. Jaya Chaturvedi with us today. Jaya will discuss the importance and significance of political parties in policy making in the context of India.
Let's say when we talk of democracy, essentially we are talking of political parties that represent certain dominant ideologies. And when we say dominant ideologies, we're talking broadly of the free market ideology or capitalism, and we're talking of socialism, where the emphasis is really on egalitarian nature of society and ensuring social justice and gender justice. But when we talk of democracy, we must remember that the essence of democracy is pluralism. That is not limiting oneself to certain ideologies, but keeping a broad array of interests in mind and factoring the same in public policy. That is what makes the task of public policy making so challenging, because there are a wide variety of interests and opinions to be factored, and it may not be possible on all occasions to come out with a rational solution to problems which come up in a democratic society. Now, people have gone to the extent of saying that democracy itself constrains development, because by its very nature it is so hard to handle that you might find it very difficult to come up with rational policy choices. With that said, we have to go by Western political philosophy, which says that, and this is the sort of the LCM, the conclusion that we have come to, that democracy really is the best form of government and there is no alternative to it. So I think with that particular context, we have to look into the role of political parties in public policy making, especially in the context of developing countries like India, where there are so many pressing concerns to attend and so many contrary pulls in policy making. Because presently, like in India, we can say on the one hand we're talking of liberalization and globalization and privatization, and on the other hand we have to look at the interest of agriculture and rural development. Now there could be contrary pulls, and as has become evident in the recent past, with farmers committing suicides in extreme cases, and
case of Vidarbha we have seen.
Absolutely, and there are many pressing concerns of women and child development and gender justice. Now in budget you have limited resources and sort of very pressing problems for which you have to find solutions. And on the other hand, you have to go for free market, which though arguably does reinforce certain special interests where the few benefit at the cost of many. But again, when we talk of development, I think we have to go for free market, because business spurs on development. So if you constrain business, you're not going to have development. So I think it is in the context of these two opposing forces that we have to appreciate public policy making in India. And now in this year's budget, our finance minister has allocated more funds for education and health and more rural development programs.
Yeah, earlier it was for primary education, now it will be for secondary also.
Yeah, education and health, and I think he's absolutely right in doing so. But at the same time, he's put on a dividend distribution tax, which has sort of put business on the back foot a bit, and that did not reflect very well in the Sensex. So But I think
Excuse me,
these
Jaya,
are the
if we see
imperatives.
all these developments, can we say there is role of political parties behind these developments and these issues?
Yes, absolutely. Now, when we are looking at the coalition government, when we are looking at the current governing alliance, we are talking of the CPIM, which is the main supporter to the government, and we are looking at Congress I. Now, we are saying the Congress I really has been a movement. It has been a movement of varied interests, varied ideologies, which has sort of managed to reconcile themselves and move along together. So it has been a cementing force. It has been a movement which has brought opposing forces together. And we are looking at its alliance with the left, which will sort of reinforce social justice issues like rural development and social development. So we are looking at agreement. We are looking at reconciliation of different ideologies in the present government, and I think that is that is driving public policy making currently in our country. So I think it is in the context of the Congress, the present alliance that we have to really appreciate India's public policy in the field of social development, in economic development, and even when we talk of policy making in the international context.
Very rightly said, Jaya, but we have seen in different states there are different parties which are in power. Like if we talk about Punjab, then Shiromani Akali Dal is there now. BJP is also supporting that. So when other parties are in power at the state level and at center level, different parties in power, then how they manage? Do you think that in making final policies at the center, state government has some effect, or political parties which are in power at the state level are also having some kind of impact on the policies which we are making at the center?
Yes, we are a unitary arrangement with a bias towards the center, but we have a federation. We have states which will legislate on the state list. It has 66 items.
Yeah.
I think the constitution has worked out the federal arrangement pretty clearly.
Yeah, it's very
we have
clear. These are the
absolutely
important issues for state, then center, and where center and state will work together.
Yes, in the
So
recent
these
past.
things are very much clear, and our states are also giving respect to this type of suggestion and agreements. But in certain cases we have seen, like in case of BJP, we see that they give importance to Masjid Mandir kind of a thing. We have seen in Ayodhya or some other kind of issues, which at center, when we are going to make some kind of policy, we see different kind of angle of our political party which is having majority at the center level. So how they decide, or how state level political parties influencing the decisions of at the center?
I think besides talking about this,
when their interests are different, when their ideologies are different.
Yeah, so when we are talking about, let's keep this particular contentious issue apart, but we have seen in the recent past state parties, especially in Tamil Nadu and in West Bengal and in Kerala, and also the parties which have come up in Uttar Pradesh, and they have been able to assert themselves. And I think public policy making in states has been largely governed by, it has been determined completely by the ideology of the state government in power, and centre really has had a very little moderating influence on the state parties. Now, theoretically that would be a very desirable situation to have, because we are not looking at one party dominance anymore. We are looking at a coalition of political parties, and we are looking at pluralism. We are looking at many different interests coming up. But practically, yes, it does pose certain problems. As you did highlight, it is very difficult to come to rational policy choices in every case. And when we are looking at contrary poles or opposing ideologies, we do have irrational issues coming up, like the Mandir Masjid issue, as you referred, and even many other irrational choices that do come up. I did refer at the very beginning that democracy itself constrains development. It does to a large extent, and it is not always that you will fall upon a rational judgment. It's not always that you will keep away the irrational judgments in public policy making. As Equal Drawers call them, extra rational judgments. So I think that is a constraint of democracy, but then you have to give it to democracy in this case, in the sense that its strengths will counteract its own weaknesses in time, and you have to go by that. So I think as far as center-state relationship is concerned, in the context of public policy making, I would say despite different parties ruling in different states and a coalition set up at the center, I think different issues have been brought up. Policy making has become more diverse. And I think it is also having a positive influence on administration, which is not dominated by or by one party ideology, and does not have to go in every case by what the dominant ideology at the center is. And they have more policy choices, more broader arena of interest to look at, and I think that is a step forward in democracy, not a retrograde step.
So from this discussion, it is evident that role of political parties is very important, particularly when we talk about the relationship between center and state, or role of intergovernmental organizations, or role of intergovernmental relations in public policy making. So here in this context, when it is evident that public policy making is at all the three stages, first at the center, state, and then local governance. In fact, if we discuss in this way, we start policy making from the grassroots level, then we go to state, and after that center. So in many cases we have seen that the power political party is having at the state level, that is influencing the policy making at the state level from grassroots level. But when this policy reaches to the central level, at that level how this political party influence the party which is having power at the center, that is important, because in policy making, different organizations like we have seen Planning Commission, National Development Council, and other organizations, even ministries are also involved. So they are preparing a base report for further developments and for further policies. So at that time, we can say that political parties, some of the political parties are working or contributing as we can say they are also playing a role of interest groups, because they are also having certain interests and they want to fulfill their interests. So they are contacting the influential persons to satisfy their needs or requirements.
Absolutely, this is the case. Now, when we are looking at public policy making in a broader systems perspective, as you put it, I think up till now we were limited to two tiers. We were talking of the central government and we were talking of state governments. But after the 73rd and 74th amendments, I think we are also going to talk about interest articulation at the local level, which is going to make public policy more meaningful and more related to the real needs of people at the grassroots level. Now, in public administration terms, you really have to think about clearing the channel up from the grassroots level up to the district center, then to the state level, and then to the union level, so that there is a continuous process of interest articulation and feedback. We are talking of a communication loop, that goes both ways, top down and bottom up. So I think in administrative terms, we are looking at developing institutional capacity at the local level and even at the state level to bring this into practice. So we are talking of communication basically. Now here, when we talk of political parties, we talk specifically about political communication. Now, our learners must be familiar with the word political communication. It's a term which is put forward by Gabriel Abbott. It's attributed to him. His contribution to public administration literature. Now, what is political communication? Political communication is how political leaders apprise the people, masses in general, of the policies and objectives of the government and how he sort of institutionalizes himself a two-way communication process, a two-way interactive process between the government on the one hand and people at large on the other. So I think this task of political communication is very important in a democracy, because you are talking of interest articulation, which is done very clearly, very specifically at all levels, and there are channels through which these interests develop and they move up, they inform public policy making at the district level, at the state level, and then it moves up to the central level. So here really we are not talking of an ideological clash between the political party at the center or the political party at the state or in the local institutions, but here we are talking of give and take, where political parties recognize sort of and understand each other's ideology and look at solving the real concerns of people. Now we know in real life situations we are not talking of one ideology that is always applicable or always true. You have to adapt your thinking to the real situation at hand. So we are not just talking of ideologies, we are talking of tackling real situations. And I think that is where a common agreement develops between political parties professing different ideologies. So I think here we are really talking of public administration, about developing institutional capacity, about sort of establishing this communication from the lower levels up to the central level, and you do it through the mechanism of political parties. So we are not just talking of sloganeering and sort of raising up or raking up issues. We are just talking of real politics, which is about knowing what people need and satisfying it through public policy. Now a very sad sort of state of affairs prevails at present. We have funds allocated to municipal councillors. You read it in today's newspaper, and they are not able to spend that entire fund at their disposal. It has been increased in the present budget. They're going to have more funds, and funds to the tune of about 164 crores or something is given back to the centre because they were not able to utilize it completely in their wards. So some people who've done outstandingly well, and some people who've not been up to the mark. So I think the media has a role to play over here. I think
media
the
media has a very significant role to play, because media give all kind of informations from top to bottom, that what is the thinking of our political leaders, administrators, citizens, local area people, and particularly the persons who are working on the policy, and what will be the better options for that on that particular issue. So this type of development is definitely required, and this type of information is required to local citizens also. Like we have seen that more than 50% people depend on video. Like in all our villages, most of the villages are having television, if not in all the houses, at least one television at the panchayat level. So they are very much aware about the developments in the nation and about the policies also. So that is the reason, non-governmental organizations are also contributing a lot, particularly at the time of need of technical assistance. Some NGOs are providing technical assistance also to the political leaders and our panchayat representatives also for making policies and submitting these policies. Otherwise it's very difficult for them to make budgets and how to finalize the different kind of heads accounts particularly. And at this stage our TV programs, our other type of media resources are helping a lot. There are certain specific programs on these issues which are really helping our citizens, and definitely this is the basic requirement and background, I will say, for developing good cordial relationship with political leaders. All political parties want their representatives at the powerful stage, and this stage is not only in the center but at state and at grassroots level also. We have seen the contribution and role of political parties in panchayat elections also, where they are not contributing directly but indirectly. We have seen the elites, we have seen the interest groups which are supporting political parties so that they also want to fulfill their motives Naturally, these are not selfish motives. Like suppose we take the Kisan organizations, we take the industrialist organizations, we take the labor parties. Naturally, they don't want exploitation, they want their rights, and to provide them these rights, there are certain kind of organizations which are contributing best with the help of political parties. These parties are not influencing public policy making at the district level, but they are influencing at the state level, and then the state level important representatives either in administration or in politics are also trying their level best to influence public policy making at the center, public policy making at the planning commission, in the meetings of NDC, in the ministries. So this way political parties are contributing in public policy making. But here the major concern is whether they are giving importance to satisfy their personal needs or needs of the people who are supporting them. And what is the basic requirement? What is required? That is the all-round development of the nation. As Jaya initially said, we want socio-economic development, we want liberalization, we want privatization, and there are so many obstacles in the way of privatization we have seen. And in certain cases, like in telecom industry, we have seen privatization is successful. And we can adopt in other areas also, which will definitely help in the development of our nation. But how to remove these obstacles? In removing these obstacles, do you think that political parties can contribute? Yes, of course. We will discuss this issue with Jaya Chaturvedi. Jaya, do you think that political parties can contribute in removing all the obstacles which we are facing in the way of privatization or disinvestment, I will say particularly?
I think there is a common agreement among all political parties as far as privatization is concerned, because after the 1991 crisis, I think India has woken up to the fact that growth in terms of numbers is important. I think you will achieve social development or social justice or social equality only after you have explored ways and means to augment your wealth, your collective wealth. So I think, as I said earlier, you have to give impetus to business, because it is business alone that is going to create jobs. So here there are difficult policy choices that are presented to the government here. Let's say, for example, if you give permission to a mall, a big shopping mall, it creates employment. There are many poor people from villages in the NCR region who've come here, who found employment in these malls. So there's no denying the fact that privatization is giving a spurt to employment. And then there is the other issue, the other side to the coin, and that is sustainable development. How do we protect our environment simultaneously? So how do we sort of encourage growth, give impetus to business, and at the same time look at the other human concerns, like environment protection and the rising consumerism or materialism in society? Because if you look at the role of state, if you explore it in Western political philosophy, you will find that it is not just material development that is the responsibility of the state. It is also enjoined to look after the moral and spiritual development of people. So I think there have been many contestable decisions, like permitting private media channels to come in the country, or sort of, let's say, there have been many culturally contestable issues. But then I think there is a very real concern, and that real concern is, in order to remove poverty, in order to create more employment opportunities, you have to go in for growth in terms of numbers, that is wealth creation. I think all political parties have come to a consensus on this. I think there is absolutely no contest and no going back on liberalization or privatization. Along with that, the government is attempting at present to give a spurt to social development, given within the constraints of economic resources that are available, and the constraints of let's say other constraints, like factoring all possible concerns, because there are, as I said earlier, many varied interests to be taken into account while making a policy. And that is also a positive thing, because different interests get factored. Also a negative thing, because that reduces policy to a least common denominator, what we call an LCM, and it may not be optimal, it may not be optimally rational, but it may be acceptable. And So democracy does provide for slow growth, but it's slow and continuous and consistent, and that is why it is the preferred form of government. As far as the role of political parties is concerned, I think moderation is the word. Coming to a common agreement is the word. Reconciliation
Of course, we definitely
of
need
interest.
joint efforts here, because in the case of polio, I have seen, there are certain parties which are saying that, parties are not interested to do it properly. That's why we are not getting it to become it more effective. But when they will join hands, instead of criticizing each other, they will work for that particular issue, for that particular area of development. We will definitely attain development.
Yeah, because here we've had political parties taking extreme positions on certain issues.
Exactly.
For example, we had this issue of the Mandir Masjid issue put up earlier, and we've had different other issues where they've taken up very sort of irrational, a bit hard
And
to
moreover,
understand.
there are so many political parties, and sometimes I feel there are certain political parties, and sometimes you have to think that these are political parties or interest groups, because they are concentrating on the interest of particular community. So that way, at that time, we have to definitely think how to make efforts to unite these political parties to work for the development of the nation. Like in yesterday, I have seen Apna Dal is also there, which is contributing now. So I really feel surprised at that time that, after independence, we have seen that Congress remained mostly in power, and they contributed a lot for the development of agriculture, for the development of industry, and particularly if we see the developments at the grassroots level, and these developments are also political parties played significant role, and we have seen the role of Congress I also here. And in addition to that, I would like to add one more point here, that political parties, when they will join together for development, definitely we will achieve development. But if we see their role as opposition party, that is also very crucial, particularly at the level of center, I will say, for making certain decisions. Sometimes if one party is not clear, or one party is little bit biased about some kind of issue, then opposition is definitely required. We just can't say that they will join hands, then we will achieve development. We need a strong opposition also. You will like to give some light on this? You will like to highlight the issues where we face this kind of problem and opposition parties helped us?
Absolutely. I think opposition has a very important role to play. Otherwise, we're going to have the situation of unstinted power.
Yeah.
That will not be conducive to democracy. I think both the ruling party and the opposition party have a very
in Lok
major
Sabha
role
we have seen certain
to
cases.
perform, and I think the BJP have been very good opposition so far. But what I would like to add here is that if there was more cooperation between the opposition parties and the ruling party, maybe not very overtly, but more cooperation in committees, in standing committees of parliament, in other committees where they could...
In taking effective decisions, particularly
Absolutely.
in less time.
When they could get together and take decisions and exercise a bit of moderation in public policy making, which I think is how things are in practice. But I think if it could be done even in respect of cases where we've had extreme positions up till now, that would be very beneficial for the country.
Yeah.
But even here, I think that should be kept in mind that we are not talking of a merging of ideologies. We're not talking of a merging of the opposition and the ruling on various issues facing the country.
We want cooperative efforts.
Yeah, but not opposition for the sake of opposition.
No,
but
effective.
Opposition on issues which is informative.
Yeah.
And I think here we are talking of the role of the media when it has to highlight the right kind of issues, like this issue of councillors not being able to utilize all the funds, and naming the councillors who've done well and others who haven't has been an informative effort on the part of the media, and I think that is constructive, because
and
people have
media
to know.
Give option also,
People have to know.
Yeah.
So
these suggestive policies are really helpful. in making final decisions and making final public policy.
Absolutely. And here we are talking of the right to information, so that citizens are a more active participants in the policy process.
Yeah.
Because up till now we've had people largely as passive recipients, and we've had a one-way traffic, so to say. So
Earlier
let's
this
try
was the
and
concept Mai Baap Sarkar.
absolutely.
Whatever government is doing, that is right. But now they know their rights and how to achieve them.
I think that
That is
information has to be put across to people. I think if right to information would be very important, and I think non-government organizations have been right in taking up this issue
Exactly.
and championing this issue, because it's very important to have aware citizenry.
Yeah, earlier
For
they
them
were
to
not
be-
aware how much money they are getting and in which head they are getting.
Absolutely.
Now they are very much aware that how much money they are getting for the development works and for routine regular works, and how much they are spending and how much is left, how they can utilize it further in the next plan.
Yes.
So how to make plans. So these type of certain things which are really helping in development, and political parties can also contribute in that.
Political parties have to perform this task of political communication more responsibly. Unfortunately, there has been this area has been left lacking.
Yeah, particularly at the district level committees can work.
Absolutely. So
Unlike-
unless the information, right information is put across to people, unless the administration goes a step further in attempting to actively incorporate people, so to enlist their cooperation, seek their cooperation proactively, I think it would be difficult on the part of people to take the first step in this regard. So I think the first step has to come from the administration side. So I think people's participation is not a distant dream, it's not a myth, it's a reality that can which can be achieved by proactive effort on the part of the government and the non-government organizations, who sort of act as a counterfeit, sort of act as a countervailing force to the government in power. So we are looking at a more aware citizenry. We are looking at a more vibrant democracy. So let's not sleep over our concerns.
Yeah, very
It's very
rightly, in
important.
political parties, members who are not in power, definitely they can contribute as an effective and good citizen who know about all the development and who can contribute in policy making also. Like we have seen in the case of Planning Commission also, they are involving citizens. And particularly if we talk about monitoring and evaluation, their political parties can contribute their best.
Absolutely, and I think towards establishing this institutional capacity and towards creating the mechanism for involving people in administration, I think e-governance is very important, and I think Kerala is going to embark on a major e-governance initiative now. So I think other states have to emulate this kind of practice, because e-governance is going to make governance very broad-based. It's going to make it reach out to people at large, and participation will follow awareness. It cannot be first. I think a major venture to create awareness among people has to be taken up, and I think the Kerala government has done well in this regard. There have been other states who've actively done that. The Karnataka has done well, largely in local government initiatives. West Bengal has been up to it, but certain states have not. So it's up to these states to really catch up with the developments in other states. I think for that to happen, people have to exercise their right to vote, because that gives them power.
Yeah.
And unless they know what is wrong with their government, unless they are made aware, they will not move towards change. So people have to change the government by the exercise of the right to vote. Information has to be put across to them. They have to know the failings of their government.
Yeah, that's important.
So I think communication is the basic organizational principle that we are looking at, and we are looking at making our people more aware,
Exactly.
and we are looking at constructive role of the mass media, the
Of
print
course.
media, the electronic media, and we are looking at educating the masses. I
Right.
think literacy programs have to be implemented properly. I think child development and social development programs have to be implemented properly, and this will not come about unless people demand it as a right, and they will not demand it as a right unless they are aware of what is wrong where and unless they have help from certain social action and non-government organizations who will come and articulate the failings or the lacunas, whatever, wherever they are. So I think that is what is going to enliven public policy. That is what is going to enliven the public policy process. With more participation, more inclusiveness, we are going to look at public policy that is more real, that addresses real concerns and is not distant and a bit abstract or based on some full-on ideology alone. Not to discard it, that is not to discard ideology, but to just relate it to real circumstances and make it solve real problems. So I think relevance of public policy, relevance of public administration is the important thing here. And I think government as also people on their part have an equally important role to play as far as enlivening the process of public policy is concerned.
Yeah, I feel like from identification of policy issues and up to evaluation, political parties can contribute a lot, and they should contribute. In that case, their political representatives can encourage them to do that. On the basis of development and implementation of public policy, we can go for monitoring and evaluation of that particular policy. Monitoring can suggest us that how we can improve further, and in making next policy and in the next 5-year plans, we can overcome all the shortcomings, all the obstacles which we faced earlier, and this will become a good lesson for us to improve further for the next policy. So political parties should be encouraged, should be motivated to do that. They should not remain busy in bringing their own people in power and then to satisfy their personal interest or interest of their near and dear ones. Basically what we have seen. So they have to overcome from these type of petty things or narrow selfish interests particularly.
Yes, but people will be influenced by this kind of propaganda only when they are not aware of the real issues.
Yeah.
Again, because if somebody says something false, then you have to stand up against the person. You need information to do that.
Exactly.
Unless there is information, I think it will be hard for people to get over propaganda. So I think we are
media is a very effective instrument for that.
That is what is being stressed in this discussion time and again, that information and correct information is important, and the mass media has a very important role to play in forming public opinion and creating that kind of awareness. As far as public policy monitoring and evaluation are concerned, I think that is an developing area in policy sciences. The problem that has come up with regard to monitoring and evaluation of public policy has been choice of yardsticks, because there are quantitative aspects of policy and there are qualitative aspects of policy. So how do we evaluate the impact of a public policy? I think here we have to begin with putting objectives very specifically and clearly. I think because the impact of a policy is to be judged against what was intended in the first place. And I think public policy, evaluation of a public policy becomes difficult when objectives are not clear. Let's say for instance, primary education.
As well, I will say.
Objective has to be absolutely clear. Let's say for instance, education, primary education. Now, clearly if you're just introducing education without a very specific objective in mind, it would be difficult to evaluate in quantitative terms its impact in that particular case. Now, if the objective is employment generation, let's say in certain sectors, if you're targeting something and if you formulate your syllabus accordingly, then it would be possible to judge, evaluate in terms of numbers the impact of that particular education or that particular course in the coming years. It was able to generate employment to this degree. I think it's very important to reduce or cut short the abstract element in policy, the non-quantifiable element in policy, and come down as far as possible to numbers and quantification of the effect of policy, and I think it
Exactly.
is not altogether impossible. I think it would be no excuse to say that evaluation is difficult because there are many non-quantifiable aspects of policy. Yes, but attempt has to be made to convert those non-quantifiable aspects into quantifiable aspects. I think the first step would be to put in very clear and specific terms the objective of a certain initiative. And I
Yeah.
think then it should be possible in a few years to judge the impact of that particular policy in terms of the
Like for
objectives
example, we
that was
say
intended.
attainment of elementary primary education by 2010. Then we can measure it.
But what is the sort of the objective of introducing? Is it just to create literacy, or is it to create jobs in certain sectors, or is it to equip them with vocational knowledge? So I think the objective of each
Yeah,
and
as
every
I said,
policy
elementary
statement
primary
has to be.
education.
Yeah.
So this is the objective. So at that moment we are talking about elementary education, and suppose if we want to add here professional courses, job oriented courses, so that suppose we say that under poverty line there are 26% people, and by 2010 we will like to achieve the figure like only 20% people will remain under the poverty line.
Yes, but how will that education tackle poverty? Because you have to convince the people. Because
Yeah.
if the dropout ratio is high, if people don't want to send their children to school because they would rather have them work somewhere in a factory because
Yeah.
that would help them earn their
Exactly.
livelihood, then I think targeting policy to achieve a certain specific goal and then measuring its impact in terms of that particular goal is going to be important. So it's not just education for the sake of education, but education towards for something,
Yeah.
for alleviating poverty, for creating employment. Then was it successful in creating employment? To what degree? I think that would be the yardstick by which policy evaluations need to be attempted. I think public policy making also has to get more concrete, more specific, and more targeted.
Yeah, of course.
That is what we are saying. So I think broadly in this discussion we have discussed the role of political parties, the role of mass media, and the role of agencies at district, state and national level which are involved in policy making. I think among major determinants of public policy are also international agencies which exert a major influence on public policy construct.
Like UNESCO is contributing a lot for the development
Absolutely,
of India.
the United Nations and the International Monetary Fund and United Nations Development Program. Now, we will begin this session by a discussion of the impact of international agencies on our current program of liberalization and globalization and privatization that is currently underway. I think in what way do you think international agencies are exerting a positive influence, or whichever way you might want to put it, not so positive or maybe a negative influence on public policy making processes in India, and to what extent our coalition government is able to co-opt or modify or adapt to that kind of pressure, or what is the response like? So I would request Dr. Nandini to please start this session with her comments, then we could take that discussion further.
Yeah, in this discussion we have discussed about the role of political parties, media and interest groups. In the next session we will deal with the role of non-governmental organizations, in which we will discuss the role of interest groups as well as role of international agencies in development of India. So as far as international agencies are concerned, as I said about UNESCO, that is contributing a lot for the development of India through providing education and influencing policy also. In this session, we will end this session with the words that political leaders and political parties are contributing a lot for the development of India, not only in policy making but in implementation also. Like, they identify the important issues for policy making, they contribute their suggestions through their ideas, through their views, through their support for policy making, and at the time of implementation, after implementation, they also monitor the impact of policies. Which area is not very effective, And for that purpose, we suggest, and on the basis of this discussion we reach to the conclusion that political parties should contribute effectively in implementation and impact analysis also. That is the only way to achieve all-round development and make effective public policy for India. In political parties, when we talk about political parties, these are not only parties which are in power, but parties which are not in power and are contributing effectively as opposition at the center, at the state and at the district level. However, these days political parties are not very effective at the panchayat level, but at the grassroots level, at district or block level, they are contributing effectively in public policy making at the level of implementation also. In this context, they cooperate with administrator also for public policy making and for implementation. At the time of implementation, proper and effective cooperation of political parties are definitely required to implement these policies effectively. And with these words, we will end this session, that political leaders, administrators and citizens should work together to achieve all-round development goals in India and effective public policy making and implementation. Students, if you have any queries or any questions, kindly ask us. We will be here in the next session also, in which we will be touching upon the important issues related to interest groups and international agencies. And if you want this discussion in Hindi, you kindly tell us.